wine isn't just about what we're smelling. It's a feast for the senses. It's the sound of the cork coming out of the bottle. It's the color of the wine in the glass. You look at that and that'll give you hints about what you're going to smell and taste. But it's also tactile. It's how it feels inside your mouth, the texture.
Welcome to Mixing Up Midlife, the weekly podcast for women in their 50s and beyond who want to explore this incredible age by being more adventurous and more curious. I'm Terri.
And I'm Melissa. And we have a special guest in this episode. We are so excited to have Marilee Bramhall, who is the founder of Iola Wines. Notice a theme from our past episodes? Marilee is doing her part to change the wine world status quo. Terri, do you know that 80% of wine purchases in the U.S. are made by women? But only 15% of the winemakers worldwide are women?
I did not know that until Marilee told us that.
So Marilee's company, Iola Wines, champions women's vigneronnes, there's my French there for you, who are every bit as talented as their French and Italian brethren by sharing their wines through Iola Wine Society Clubs. We are so excited to welcome Marilee to the show.
Thank you so much, both of you, for having me. It's really great to be here.
It's so good to have you.
Yes, this is so wonderful. This is stuff I think we've talked about in the past. Everything from understanding wines to wine tasting to even, I think we have discussed women in the wine business.
I'm so happy that you shared that stat to start off, because it is really striking when I'm doing private master classes for our private customers and club members. That's one of the things I share. Are you aware that only 15% of winemakers globally are women? And when we talk about that 15%, we're not actually talking about the volume of wine being made by women. If we thought about that number, it's significantly less. So it's really crazy when you think about the flip side of those stats. Up to 80%, some say 85% of wine purchases in the U.S. are made by women. It's actually kind of exciting and inspiring that if women want to be a part of elevating women in wine, we actually have a great way to do it. We're already buying the wine. If we just direct our purchases more toward women, then we'll get that 15% number up. I'm confident.
And I think that's all education.
I agree.
Right? And knowing who's behind what you're buying. This is so important in everyday life, but especially when we're supporting small women-owned businesses. Let's elevate. Absolutely. Let's elevate. So can you tell us about Iola Wine, why you started it?
Sure, absolutely. Wine's been in my life really forever. Had the great good fortune to grow up with a dad who's just always been, I would just call him an enthusiast. He's never studied wine, but he just always enjoys it. And so when I was probably like 10 or 11, it was a beautiful summer day. He grilled some T-bone steaks and he was having his favorite Left Bank Bordeaux. And for whatever reason, decided I could have like this much. And that taste just left a huge impression on me. And it wasn't that, my palate was so developed that I loved the flavor of the wine and the taste of the wine. It wasn't that at all. It was what it symbolized and what it meant. So fast forward for me, I ended up spending some time studying in France when I was in college, came home, and I joined the wine industry here in the U.S. for just under a decade. For me, and there's, I think, a lot of people in the wine business that find that it's just one of those things that grabs onto you and won't let go. I did try to leave the wine business for a while, and I did some other kinds of work for a while, but I ended up back into it. Basically in 2008 is when I got really curious about the old world. And there are some amazing Cab Sauvignon grown in Napa, but I just wanted to figure out, where did it actually come from? It's not native to there. So for me, really, I started importing wines made by women in 2017, and things came into very clear focus around the Me Too movement. And, it was an interesting time because I had conversations with a few people that found it to be a little bit silly. And then when I, said, hang on, you've got a mom, you got cousins, you've got sisters, you've got friends that are women. If you went around and talked to all of those women in your life about what their experience has been, I think you'd be pretty surprised. So it was really around that it became clear to me that what I was going to do with this import business was focus it completely on women it's always been important to me to look for women that are very conscientious about how they're growing their grapes. So I only work with producers that grow their own grapes. They're not buying grapes from other people. So we know from vine to glass exactly what's happening with that, with how the grapes are grown and how the wines are made. So they're very conscientiously grown and made.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah.
The biodynamic organic. Explain that a little bit, the differences, what it means, because I think that might be confusing.
I agree. It is confusing. Organic, that one's a pretty easy one to explain. This is how I explain it in master classes. I mean, think about when you walk into the grocery store and you go into the produce section and there's conventional produce and then there's the organic section. It's exactly the same way with wine. There's organic wines, and that means that the grapes have been grown organically. Now, the tricky thing about organic certifications is that every country has their own rules about that. In Europe, it's all governed by the European Union. So that makes it a little simpler. However, when it comes to the US, there's different rules here for what qualifies as organic. And I have to always put out this disclaimer that I've been out of the US wine industry for a long time now. So I'm not completely up on what's going on here. I think there's a lot of increased activity for organic farming, which is great. When we talk about biodynamic, that is taking things a step further. And some people think it's a lot of woo-woo stuff. Other people think that, and this is sort of, pretty much what I believe, it's really about going back to how things used to be more than a century ago, before we had chemicals that were invented and produced during World War II. And then when the war was over, they still wanted a market for those chemicals. And eventually where those ended up was in agriculture. And it was pretty easy to convince farmers that if they used these chemicals, their lives would be so much easier. They wouldn't have to work nearly as hard and save them so much time. And a lot of people went that way. Now, when we think about biodynamic, for me, I think the simplest way to explain it to people is biodynamic farmers and growers think about their farm as a whole living system. So the idea is that there is one living system and all the parts of it need to work together. Now, they do some things. This is where the woo-woo part comes in. According to, where the moon...
I like woo.
Hey, I'll tell you what, the wine is fabulous. It is really fun to taste biodynamic wines. So they're farming organically, but they're also following all the principles of, there's a guy named Rudolf Steiner who wrote a book in 1927 all about biodynamic farming. Yeah.
And you said something about they follow the moon and when to harvest the grapes. Is it in the morning? Is it night? That type of thing.
Exactly. And I mean, even with biodynamic wines, there's an entire calendar, and there are days that are root days, leaf days, fruit days, and there's certain kind of activities that you do on those days and activities that you don't do, you avoid doing. It's very detailed, it's very involved. Yeah, there's a lot to it. So getting a biodynamic certification isn't trivial. Same with getting an organic certification. Obtaining those certifications can be costly in terms of time and money. And if you're a small non-corporate producer, that can be really tough.
Very expensive, I would think.
Yeah, they can be pretty expensive and then expensive to continue to recertify because it's not a one and done thing.
So let me ask you, Marilee, when you started doing the importing, because Iola Wines is essentially then an importer, is that correct?
Well, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but I won't bore you with the details. I was an importer selling wholesale with just a tiny book of producers for the first 3 years or so. And then when COVID happened, we all have a pandemic story. And mine was that I had 6 pallets of wine arrive right before we went into lockdown. And I lost all my clients in one day. I mean, they were in lockdown and we were in that place where we had no idea what the future held. Things were so uncertain, and restaurants, for the last thing they were doing was buying wine. They were just trying to pay their rent and stay open. So that's how I started selling online direct to customer.
Got it. Really, so many terrible things happened during the pandemic, but so many interesting things also happened during the pandemic. And I think it opened up, especially for women, and I know this to be true, that women were basically recreating themselves. And it sounds like you really did that as well, which is fantastic. Yep. I love that.
Do you only work with organic and biodynamic?
That's a great question. So I only work with women that are doing some kind of sustainable viticulture. I don't require them to have an organic or biodynamic certification, just for that reason that I shared, where it can be really difficult for them. A lot of them they're also moms. They're farmers. They're winemakers. Sometimes they have a couple people that work for them and help them in the vineyard because there's just too much for one person to do. Sometimes they're dealing with elderly parents. So if someone is drinking a wine from Iola Wines, they can be sure that I've been at least one time to that producer. I've spent a day with her in her vineyards. I've spent a day, in her cellar, asking questions, getting to know what her philosophy is and her reasons behind her decisions. And, that's just an important part of what we do. So I vet them and I don't require them to have that certification. They do have to be doing some kind of sustainable viticulture. And you can certainly tell when you go into a vineyard whether there's chemicals being used there or not.
Do you feel that the women growers are more conscious about this whole idea? Is there a difference?
I love that you asked that question because it's crazy. Most of the time what I find is that when there's been a conversion to organic viticulture, there was a woman behind it. It was either a mother or a grandmother. Oftentimes it's a mom with young kids and their kids are running through the vines and playing in the vines and they don't want their kids around herbicides and pesticides and chemical fertilizers. I've known producers' daughters whose fathers became ill and died. And
from the chemical?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's what their belief is that it was due to the chemical exposure. And so they made a decision to convert to organic, which is tough. It's a real tough thing to do in some places. Depending on climate, it can be really, really tough.
Yeah. And you're thinking about it in terms of the growers and how they're involved with that chemical and don't want to be. But then we're drinking the wine and we don't want those chemicals either.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I really can't sit here and say, okay, Terri and Melissa, if you drink conventional grocery store wine, you're going to be drinking chemicals. I can't say that with 100% certainty, but it's 100% what I believe. I've had too many experiences and I've had too many customers have the experience where when they drink an organic wine versus drinking a conventional sort of grocery store mass-produced wine, they feel completely different the next day.
That is so interesting. I actually have a thing. I don't drink as much wine as I would actually like to. Wait, that sounded funny.
We would like to be drinking
kind of person, really.
We are speaking right now.
Yes, I would like to be swirling a glass right now. But a lot of the reason I don't drink wine is because I have a reaction. My face gets red. I've definitely gone to wines that don't have sulfites in them, where it says no sulfites.
Yeah.
But when I was just recently in Italy and we were drinking wines that were really small, little biodynamic farms, not one issue. So I find that fascinating. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about, so my focus is, I say naturally made wines because for one thing, natural wine it's a funny topic out in the wine world. And there's no actual global agreed upon definition for what qualifies as natural wine. And so that's the reason that I often characterize ours as naturally made. Some are organic, some are biodynamic, some are sustainably grown. But one of the things that is a common thread is a minimal use of sulfites.
Interesting.
Yeah.
There you go.
When you look at the numbers in terms of how much is allowed, for example, in the US versus in the EU, and then if you take EU organic certified, the milligrams per liter allowed is significantly less.
So the wines that come from Iola are for sure like nice, clean wines, which is really good to know.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's get into some fun stuff. We're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about tasting wine. Like I said, we wish we were tasting wine here, but sadly, it's a little too early probably for you, and you can't ship to us, and we'll talk about that in just a few seconds.
Not yet.
Not yet. And we're looking forward to when you can.
Yes, I've been to many wine tastings and things like that when I've been told to taste the oyster shell, this and that, and all the
green apricots.
Yes. And I'm not good at it. I'm not good at it at all. But the other thing is I don't have a strong sense of smell.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, is that the connection? Am I just hopeless? Or, I mean, I know what some wines taste good, but am I never going to have that great tasting ability because I don't have a strong sense of smell?
Here's my point of view on that. There are people that are considered to be super tasters, and there are people that have incredible, we'll say like an amazing, very sharp, keen sense of smell. I mean, I've heard about people that if they don't see as well, they tend to have a better sense of smell. So somehow, our senses compensating for each other. But the way I look at this, Melissa, is that it's just like any other thing that you learn how to do. Practice makes progress. And you can start off being someone that, you're at a wine tasting and someone's asking you, well, what do you smell? What do you smell? And all that comes to your mind
wine.
is, I smell wine. Yeah. Smells like wine. You can start from there and then, work on it in the same way that you would work on learning how to do anything else. And you will notice that it gets easier. You get better at it and you just train yourself. It's really about training your brain.
So with that and the training of your brain, there are those little scent kits. Have you seen these?
Yes.
And do they work? Are they for real? Or is it just because I looked online and I was like, $500. Wow.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But are they like the real deal where you can start training yourself with these scent kits?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Really?
They are. Yeah. So, I mean, what I did is rather than spending the $500 for Linné, which, I mean, I would love to have Linné, but it's a little pricey. So instead I made my own. It's really easy to make your own. You can make it kind of as big as you want. And then my husband is a guy that likes to work on projects in the garage. So he built me a nice little box with little drawers and I have all these little jars in it. And I mean, I just have filled them with all kinds of things, white pepper, black pepper, cardamom, thyme, rosemary, all of the herbs that you can think of, lavender, vanilla, mushroom. I also use some small bottles of essential oils.
Mm.
And it is really interesting when you start working with, you just spend like 10 minutes a day smelling these things. And, what I do is I just close my eyes and it'll be like, okay, jasmine, this is jasmine. And I just do a couple at a time.
So you're putting this smell in your memory.
Exactly. Basically, what you're doing is you're creating a mental card catalog. And the more you do it, the quicker your brain gets at recognizing those smells. Now, there are some wines they can be a little bit shy and they're not leaping out of the glass in terms of aroma. And those can be really fun. It's like a game of hide and seek. And it's probably going to sound weird, but I actually just talk to the wine and, ask, what do you want me to know? What do you want to tell me? What do you want me to discover about you? And
I love it. And
that is really cool.
So much like the Drops of God show, because it really showed her blindfolded, smelling things. And then she wasn't just identifying, it showed her like picturing herself somewhere. That's kind of what it sounds like you're describing to me.
Yeah. I mean, I am a believer that training your palate is possible for anyone. And like I said earlier, there are those people that are just, wow, they're just superstars at this. And there's always going to be people that are super gifted. We're not all going to be on a level playing field with it, but it is possible to train your brain. And then when I teach master classes about this, one of the things I love to do is help people that feel intimidated or uncomfortable. And this often happens with women. There's a whole conversation about how women engage with wine when men are present and when they are not, and how that's different. And I've observed this so many times and of course read about it too. But what I like to do is get people that don't feel so comfortable with the aroma side of things to experience it in a different way that is more accessible for them. For some people, what I do is I say, you know what? Sip the wine, keep it in your mouth, swirl it around, close your eyes and think about, do you see shapes? Do you see colors? Is there a memory that's coming up for you? Do you see images of a place? And it's really, really fun to see people that's, when they're sitting around a table of people that are like, oh, I smell a green apricot and the oyster shells. And there's maybe one or two people that are like, wow, I don't get this at all. So giving them another way to engage makes it accessible. And I mean, for me, that's part of democratizing wine, which is what I'm trying to.
Oh God, I love that you're saying that.
I love that too.
It's like, it's similar to like coffee, right? Coffee has this ridiculous, and I love coffee. I love espresso. I love tasting, but it has that pretentiousness that is very intimidating. I think if you're not into it or can't discern different tastes. So I don't know why I never put the two together, but yeah. But you actually said something, Marilee, that I'm curious about. So you do master classes. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about that.
Yeah.
But also when you were saying in these master classes, you have people close their eyes and maybe put themselves in a place. And now I'm thinking to what you just said in the beginning when you said your dad, you were like, 10 or 11, and your dad let you taste this little bit of wine. So if you have that little bit of similar wine, does it put you back in that place? And do you feel like wine puts you in a certain place? Is it the smells? Is it the tastes? What do you think?
Oh, gosh. Thank you for asking this, Terri, because for me, above all, wine is about a sense of place. And this really gets to why I have so much passion around the two countries that I work with, France and Italy, and the producers that I work with there that are small producers, why I'm so proud to have these wines in our wine clubs. It's because when you taste those wines, you are tasting that terroir. You're tasting the place where that wine was grown.
Just got shivers. Sorry.
I know, me too.
For me, it's just a magical thing. It's a really magical thing, wine is. And that's how I ended up turning into a wine geek and pursuing it in a more scholarly way. Just, one day having a conversation with my husband, and I said, I kind of feel like, not everyone thinks that wine is as amazing as I think it is. And he's like, you think? Like, okay, well, I'm getting after this then, because it's got its hooks in me for a reason. There's something I'm supposed to do with this.
That is very cool.
Yeah. So tell us about these master classes. How do you teach them?
Primarily private classes, and it's most of the time it's members and customers asking me to do them. And there's just a variety of different things that I'll do. Champagne is a place I'm really passionate about, studying it more in the last few years. I have concluded, this is my opinion, Champagne, the region, and the wine is what it is today, largely because of the resilience and the innovation of women. There is such a story about women in Champagne. And it's a story that's continuing today. Women are doing incredible things. Mm-hmm. And it's not an easy place. One of the producers I work with in Champagne, we were talking a couple months ago when I was with her. I was asking her, how is it being a woman wine grower in Champagne? What's it like now? And is it better than it was? And she said, it's better. But the thing is that if a woman makes a mistake, no one ever forgets it. If a man makes a mistake, men can make mistakes, and no one thinks about it. No one really holds them to those mistakes. So it's a tough place. It is challenging for women to do what they're doing there.
How many women in the Champagne industry or growers or producers are there? Do you know?
How many women producers in Champagne are there?
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious.
Percentage-wise, it's around 20%.
Wow.
Of Champagne growers are women. Yeah.
That's pretty low. Wow.
For 2023, it seems like we could,
Yeah, we're always looking for parity, right? I think that's what we continually have to fight for. And this is a good conversation to have to help promote that and promote education and awareness about wine and women growers and producers. It's really an important conversation. Can you tell us, Marilee, a little bit about Iola Wine Clubs?
Oh, sure. Yeah. The clubs are really fun. There's a few different clubs that are available through our Iola Wine Society. The one that's the most popular is our Connoisseur Club, and it's the most popular because it's a little bit of everything. You get some red wine, you get some white wines, you get every once in a while a rosé, which I tend to do seasonally, and then I love sparkling wine.
Me too.
I love beautiful sparkling wine. So there's a sparkling wine that shows up a few times a year. And the Connoisseur Club, I curate all the wines personally. And then I take pains over the insert that I write that goes in with the bottles. And what that insert is a description of each wine in terms of course, what it is, the grape, the vintage. I talk about the woman that grew it. And then I do a tasting note and food pairing guidance for the Connoisseur Club. Our members also get a recipe with every allocation that comes from one of the producers.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. So I ask our producers for, what's a recipe that you love to make with this particular wine? So it's a recipe that's meant to be paired with one of the wines that goes in the allocation. We send that out, the allocations out 4 times a year, and there's 6 bottles in each one.
And that's with the Connoisseur Club. And there are other levels of this club. What are the states that you work with currently? I know you said before we started recording, you're hoping to get in 42 states. So
I'm working on a project. Yeah, it's going to take a while, unfortunately, because there's so many pieces that have to be worked out in order to make this work. But right now, we're currently shipping to on the East Coast, New York, DC, and Florida. And then kind of in the middle of the country, Minnesota, Colorado, and Wyoming. And then on the West Coast, it's Washington, Oregon, and California.
Okay, fantastic. Melissa could have gotten it. Well, you're not DC, though. You're Virginia.
Did you say DC was one of you?
DC, yeah.
And I could have scooched over to New York.
Yeah, we're both just a little bit over the border.
If you have a friend that lives in either of those places that will take your deliveries, then that works.
I have a very avid wine drinker aunt that lives in Colorado, so
share the word, pass it on.
Christmas gift ideas.
That's a great Christmas gift idea.
I've had people that have gifted membership for retirement gifts, for Christmas gifts. I mean, our Sparkling Club membership is a lot smaller. It's just 2 times a year. You get 4 bottles. And this year I'm doing all champagne because I've met so many extraordinary women in Champagne. These champagnes are a few of them are not available anywhere in the U.S.
That's very cool.
They're really small producers, and the way that they're farming and their commitment to what they're doing is just so inspiring. Each of them has an amazing story. I mean, one of them, her great-grandmother sewed corsets, and she sold corsets to the chic department stores in Paris. And that's when they started their champagne vineyard, where the great-grandmother supported the family through her corset business.
Wow. See, it's always women.
I have another question. I don't think you're offering this now, but is this an idea in your head of doing some type of tour to some of these places with some women?
Yeah.
I like that question.
Yeah. So it's funny that you're asking me that because I'm actually working with some customers right now that are wanting a trip. I've done a lot of master classes with this group of women, and they're like, we want to go. We want to meet these women. We've heard so much about them.
That's what I feel like. I'm like, sound like amazing women. I'd love to.
They are. They're amazing women, and the places are beautiful. I mean, that's one of the great things about the wine business is I don't spend a lot of time in big cities. I'm usually out in the countryside and in these beautiful locations. So yes, Melissa, the answer is yes. That's definitely in the future. And I've done a few tours, food and wine tours in France where I've been hired on as a wine educator. I'm actually doing one this June in Provence, and we still have a few spots left on that. It's not as wine focused as what a lot of my customers want. There's a lovely wine element to it, but it's also got a lot of cultural pieces as well.
Before we have to wrap up, I wanted to ask you one other little fun question. Say we're trying to do wine on our own and pull sense out of it from drops of God, and we don't have to keep referring to it, but we will. They do a swirl and then a sniff, a swirl, and then a sniff again. Is that true, false, or pretentious, or what does it do? And should we try to do that as well?
Okay. Here's my answer to this question. that is a very French thing to do. I see this all the time in France and sometimes in other places, not always. I think a fun thing to do is to experiment doing it both ways. So pour 2 glasses of the same wine and do one where you first sniff it. In France, they call that the premier nez, the first nose. Then they swirl and smell again, and that is the second nose. And so I do that often. I will first smell, then swirl, and then smell again. So try it both ways.
And
Definitely.
That's where we'll get oyster and green apricots.
After you practice.
Yeah, maybe after a lot
After
of
you
practice
practice for a while. Yeah. And I mean, it does help to have someone guiding you through that too. It really does.
Absolutely. And Marilee, do you do wine tastings virtually? Can you even do that virtually? Really?
I did a bunch
So
of that
explain.
during the pandemic. Yeah. Yeah. So shipping wine to people that are in the states that I can ship to. Yeah. And then doing virtual tastings. Absolutely.
Fantastic. And how long do those tastings last?
What we do is we just customize them to what the customer is after. If they want to taste, let's say, like a virtual tour of iconic wine regions of France, then, we can do that in 45 minutes to an hour, depending upon the number of wines. The more wines you have, the longer it takes, especially if people want to spend a lot of time on a wine or a few of the wines because they're really working to understand the wine and pull out those aromas. And one of the other things I like to have people do with my in-person classes is I actually use different kinds of fabric and I have them touch the fabric because wine isn't just about what we're smelling. It's a feast for the senses. It's the sound of the cork coming out of the bottle. It's the color of the wine in the glass. You look at that and that'll give you hints about what you're going to smell and taste, but it's also tactile. It's how it feels inside your mouth. The texture, especially when we think about tannins, they can be all different textures. That's where I like to use pieces of fabric, silk, muslin, linen, like a smooth piece of leather, satin, velvet.
So you asking people to associate that?
Exactly. So what I do is while you're tasting, while it's in your mouth, you'll feel the different pieces of fabric and see which one is closest to what you're experiencing from a
That's
texture.
wild.
That is wild.
Oh,
Yeah.
how fun
It's
is
really
that,
fun.
though?
Yeah,
And
it's
it
really
is
a lot
like
of fun.
a game of hide and seek. I love how
Yes.
you build all the different senses and put everything together. I would love to try to do that with blindfold or just close my eyes and think about where it puts me.
When I taste, I close my eyes. When I am actively working on tasting a wine and evaluating a wine, I taste with my eyes closed all the time.
So you're in France and Italy currently. Are there other countries that you'd like to go and start gleaning women producers from?
Yeah, there are. I mean, there's one in particular. There's a couple. The big one that is a huge draw for me is kind of a funny one because, my thing is I don't really do the New World anymore. I've had wonderful, good fortune to drink so many great New World wines when I was in the business here in the US. So when I left all of that in 2008, my intention was to stay with the Old World. However, there is a place on this planet that is kind of between the New World and the Old World because they've been at it a lot longer than most of the New World has been, but not nearly as long as the Old World. And that is South Africa. They've been growing wine in South Africa for 300 plus years.
Really?
Whereas get into the New World and it's much newer than that. In studying about it, it's really caught my interest. They're growing a grape there that I love. They're making some great progress with increasing the quality level. And it's a place that, has been really white male dominated for a long time. So it would be wonderful to get involved with some women there and to elevate what they're doing. I mean, I haven't done any research there. I haven't had time yet, but I have complete confidence that there are some women making some extraordinary wine in South Africa. That's one thing I'll say about Iola Wines as a whole. It's not just about women. First and foremost, it's about exceptional wine.
Right. My only last question would be, and I don't know if you've said it, but what is the name Iola and why is that the name of your company?
It's really, really close to my heart. Iola was my grandmother, and she was someone that was a huge influence in my life forever. I was lucky to have her for a really long time. And she really taught me the importance of having a real gratitude practice and contentment. She also loved food. She loved people. She loved parties. She was an amazing pianist. She was an artist. I mean, she was just an incredible person. And she loved to celebrate. Any reason to celebrate, she always was looking for that. She loved to have parties. And I didn't have a child to name after her. So I named this baby after her.
I love it.
An amazing story and a great place to end with gratitude and say thank you very much, Marilee. Where can people find you, find Iola Wines? Obviously, we'll put this in the show notes for people to look at, but why don't you say it here?
Sure. Thank you. So it's really easy to find me, of course, at the website, which is iolawines.com, and Iola is IOLA. That's a really easy place to sign up for our newsletter. If you're wanting to know more about these women producers, that's primarily what my newsletters are, or just producer profiles. And I talk about grapes and wines and, new things happening. And then Instagram is a great way to find me too, which is just iola.wines. I'm on there all the time doing all kinds of stuff. I'm now just started an Instagram live series with a friend and colleague on the East Coast. She's a wine writer. And every Wednesday, we're tasting a new wine from the Iola Wines portfolio. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
They're
fun.
a lot of fun.
Wednesday at what time?
Wednesdays, we're primarily doing 3 p.m. West Coast, 6 p.m. East Coast.
And if we don't have an Iola wine available, we can just watch and be educated ourselves, right?
100%. You can watch, be educated, send questions. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. This was really an interesting education and a really great conversation about women, empowering women and buying from women. It's really, really important and something really near and dear to my heart and to Melissa's as well. So thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been so fun getting to spend some time with both of you. I love your questions. Thanks again for the chance to be here.
Thank you so much. And as always, you can find us on Instagram at Mixing Up Midlife. You can leave us a voicemail on our website, mixingupmidlife.com. Leave it about 30 seconds. Or if you have a rambling question like I am doing right now, you can hang up and call back. You can join us in our Facebook group, Mixing Up Midlife. Find us on YouTube, where we will be putting this session up with Marilee so you can watch and
Unfortunately,
learn.
you're not watching us drink any wine, taste any wine, blindfolded. Would have been a great visual.
Next time, we're going to make sure we get shipped to New York and to DC and have that full-on tasting session.
You're on.
Thank you so much, Marilee. It was wonderful.
Thanks, Terri and Melissa.
I don't drink as much wine as I would actually like to. Wait, that sounded funny.
We would like to be drinking it as we are speaking right now.
Yes, I would like to be swirling a glass